Love under the scope.
Hello, and welcome back to Love Under the Scope. This is a podcast where we get into all of the ups and downs of being in a long-term relationship with another human being. In this show, I really like to take deep dives into topics that might be uncomfortable, that aren't usually talked about, especially on social media, but even in social settings with our friends, with our family. I think in our society, there's some level of performing our relationship, of pretending that everything is amazing or thinking that everything has to be perfect all the time. And if it's not, then there is something deeply wrong with us. We can end up feeling really alone when we face some of the challenges that I discuss in this show. I know I have felt alone in some of these struggles that are very natural for a couple to go through, especially a long-term couple. We're going to naturally have these ebbs and flows in the relationship, and we are going to be brought to some difficult decisions, some things that are maybe hard to face. That's the whole thing about growth and of becoming the person we want to be, is that there is some level of looking at the hard stuff and being willing to face it and move through it and have some understanding that it's normal to experience these things. I really want that to be a message on this show. Here are the topics that are a little tough, could be a little awkward, could bring on some shame, and it's totally okay. You're not alone. And no, you're not meant to break up because you had a really bad fight one time or things got a little out of hand. We are human. To an extent. Of course, there are things that I don't cover on this show, like being actually unsafe at the hands of your partner or yourself. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about more of the subtle, even nuanced, and still quite difficult experiences that we can have when we have this other person as our partner, as a mirror. That's what a partner is, especially in the long term. They become a mirror for our shit. And so it would be natural that stuff would come up. So that's what we're getting into on this show. I am your host. I'm Kelby Lauren. I'm a self-love and relationship coach. I work with individuals. I work with couples on a lot of the topics that we cover here on this show. I take the information that I share here not only from my work with clients, but from my own personal experience, from stories that I've heard from people. I have a huge passion for this topic, relationships, how we work as humans. A lot of what we will talk about on this show is going to be centered around our beliefs, our conditioning, and how we can dismantle our own beliefs in order to have an easier life. A lot of the time, our deep-seated beliefs, our subconscious beliefs about how the world works, are challenging for us. They're making life harder. And one example of that would be today's topic. So if you ever have felt like your partner's parent, maybe you don't feel that way in your current relationship, but perhaps you have experienced this in the past. That feeling where you have taken on the role of a parent, whether you wanted to or not, little by little, you and your partner slipped into this dynamic of the parent and child. If this is true for you, just know this is very, I want to say normal, although I don't want this to be normal for people. It's just, this is very common, especially for women. I will be speaking to this topic as a woman who has experienced this dynamic. So that is the perspective that I'm coming from. I do think men experience this too. In fact, I have seen it in relationships where the man is actually kind of the father and the woman is the child. And then, of course, there are gay relationships where I'm sure this same dynamic could play out. This is not specific to women feeling like the mother to their partner, although that is, I would say, my educated guess is that that would be the more common form of this dynamic. Given that women, we're taught to take care of other people, we're socialized in a way that we end up taking responsibility for others. It's kind of that nurturing quality that you would naturally usually see in a woman or a person who is feminine, you would see that nurturing. Well, this is kind of the toxic end of that. I'm becoming a martyr. I'm putting your needs, all of your needs, before any of mine. And it becomes really frustrating to be in that kind of a dynamic. It's difficult not only for the parent, quote unquote, partner, but also for the child partner. There's a level of respect that gets stripped away when we are in this kind of a dynamic. This episode is not going to be about blame and how horrible your partner is because they have allowed themselves to become this child and you're the parent, and this whole victim narrative of because I have naturally settled into this mothering role, that makes my partner the bad guy because he allowed that to happen. That's not the case in this episode. All of the topics that I cover usually go back to taking self-responsibility for how we feel. If I feel like a mother to my partner, it would behoove me to take responsibility for those feelings and to look into why I feel that way. Where did that come from? And that is what this episode is going to help you do. We will get into first what the dynamic actually is. How does it look? How do you know that you're in a dynamic like that? I would say most people that are, they know. They're like, yeah, I fucking feel like his mom. I'm aware. But we will get into some signs and how that can feel, how that can present itself in a relationship. Then we'll get into why. Why do we do this? Where does this come from? How do we go from wanting this passionate, sensual, fun, and lighthearted relationship to feeling so serious? Like I have to take care of everything and I have to be in control and watch for every behavior that they do and what they say and if they clean or they don't clean or whatever the case is. However you feel like the parent in your specific way, every couple, it will present differently. So I'll share some general ideas around how we actually develop this dynamic. And then I'll get into how can we unwind it? How can we undo the dynamic that we have created together? Every dynamic is created by two people at least. So I will share how we can start to chip away and get to the root of the issue, the root of why this pattern comes up for us. I say pattern because I believe that if you have felt this way in a past relationship, if you feel this way now, you have probably felt this way in another relationship before that at varying degrees. Maybe certain partners made you feel more or less like a parent. But in general, if we feel that way now, we probably have felt that way in the past. So this is definitely a pattern that becomes stored in the way that we operate in our relationships. Even with friendships, you might notice that you feel like a parent, not only in your romantic relationship, but in other relationships too. Friends, maybe other family members, maybe coworkers. You feel like you're always taking responsibility and taking care and putting yourself out for other people, not recognizing your own needs. That's kind of the toxic mother or the toxic father. It's kind of this smothering, criticizing, high expectations, never good enough. I have to take care of everything. I have to do everything on my own. It feels like you're a victim in my experience. I'll share that I have felt this way in relationships before. And I have felt, like I was the one that had to be responsible for the other person and their actions. And it was exhausting, and it still happens. I still feel this way sometimes because these things take a lot of time to process and strip away in my experience. And so, I have felt this, and it's really frustrating. It can take away from the sexual aspect of your relationship if you feel like your partner is your child. I mean, kind of makes sense, right? And vice versa, if you feel like your partner is your mother or your father, or you perceive them that way, I would imagine it would become a little more difficult to be aroused by them and to feel safe to be sexual and have that side of you seen and to have that desire for each other as well when we're feeling like we are a mother and a son or a father and a daughter. It's not super hot. Just put it that way. In my experience, this dynamic is exhausting. I can speak as the one who felt like the mother to my partners. It was never about them, first of all. Some of them were kind of immature, but I can say in my current relationship, I am with a very mature partner. Yeah, we are childlike sometimes. We have fun that way. We like to make stupid, silly jokes. And it's not his fault that I feel this way. This is something that I have dealt with my entire life, feeling responsible, feeling like I have to take care of and that nobody else is going to do it, so I got to do it. This is a pattern for me. So I take ownership of that side of the dynamic. Yes, there is some level of communication and maybe there are boundaries that I would want to set with my partner and things that I would like to talk about and make known. And I'm coming out and saying, I take responsibility for my feelings of being a mother to not only my current partner, but past partners too. My current relationship is where I'm learning to really unwind a lot of this stuff. And that's why I want to share it with you guys. I want to share some of what has worked for me. And I can't say these things will work for everyone, but I hope that maybe a shred of what I share today can help you to get some perspective on this kind of a dynamic if that's what you are dealing with right now. Let's dive right into what a parent-child dynamic actually is. I mentioned earlier that this is going to be different for every couple. This will manifest in its own special way, depending on the person and their experiences in life, their values, their beliefs, all of that and more will affect how you experience the parent-child dynamic in a romantic relationship. In general, this kind of a dynamic comes about because one partner has this sometimes very deep-seated fear that they need to take responsibility for the other person, for their partner's behavior, their actions, their livelihood. This partner truly believes at a core level that they have to be the caretaker. In my experience, this feeling usually sprouts out of the idea that nobody else is going to do it. Now, I have to be the one to take this responsibility because if nobody else does it, it's not going to get taken care of and something really bad could happen. I could look stupid. I could be unlovable. I could die. Really, when we're talking about beliefs, we go back to childhood with that. Beliefs usually are formed in early childhood where we form those beliefs in order to keep ourselves safe, in order to survive. So death could be wrapped up in some of our fears that are really deep-seated. If I don't take care of this person, that means something really, really bad, including death, could happen. And that's why I am so obsessed with making sure that I am always taking responsibility. I'm always being in control. And when I say taking responsibility, it kind of sounds good. Like, oh, I take responsibility. No, I'm taking responsibility for your stuff, for your behaviors, your choices. You are my partner. You're a separate person. You are a separate human being. Yes, we have decided that we love each other and we're going to start a life together and we're going to share all of our stuff and we're going to be connected and dedicate ourselves to connection. And you are still another person. Therefore, I shouldn't take your stuff on at any level. Maybe I can consider your shit if I'm aware of what your conditioning is and your beliefs are, but it's very messy when we start to believe that we have to take on our partner's stuff and be responsible for it, no matter what it is. If it's them getting ahead in life and getting a new job, or the way that they express themselves, the way that they speak, the way that they do household tasks, the way that they live, basically. This dynamic can show up very subtle, where we are not outwardly showing that one partner is the parent and the other is the child. Maybe an outsider wouldn't be able to tell that that kind of a dynamic is taking place. And then there are times where it's very obvious. I'm sure you as the listener have seen relationships where it was so glaringly obvious that this couple had one partner who was a parent and one who was the child. And it can be almost kind of sickening to watch, maybe because I personally have experienced it. But when you see those couples that are really intense about this, it makes you think. And there are couples who enjoy this kind of a dynamic. There are women who enjoy feeling like the mother. There are men who enjoy feeling like the father. And perhaps if that's the case, then that's fine. If you are okay with that and you have agreed verbally or maybe non-verbally, maybe subconsciously, you two have agreed that, hey, this works for us. Good for you. I'm speaking to anybody who is frustrated by this, who this doesn't work for, which I would say is the majority of couples. That's because the parentified partner often feels very edgy, hypervigilant, super critical, always looking out for something that the other partner could be doing wrong, that would need to be fixed, that would need to be criticized, and that isn't perfect according to my standards. That's the other thing about becoming the parent partner in this kind of toxic way. There are these expectations. If any of you guys out there had a mother who was not accepting of anything, who had very high standards, nothing was ever good enough. This is kind of the idea that we're getting at, that we become this for our partner. Ugh, I almost want to kind of gag thinking about that one partner could look at the other like this finger wagging. I think of like a very critical teacher that's just wagging her finger at you. Ooh, yucky. It's not sexy. There's no sex appeal there. Not that we have to be sexy all the time as women, but I sure want to feel sexy in my relationship. And I can't say that I do when I'm hovering over my partner and waiting for him to make a mistake so I can swoop in and correct him. Or when we're out at a party and I feel like I have to be responsible for how he expresses himself and the jokes that he makes. And if I feel like he's crossing a line, that's a really bad feeling. I'm going to tell you right now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I will tell you, it is really uncomfortable to sit there and feel this way around other people behind closed doors. It's just never fun to be in this role of mother, and I assume father. I can't speak to that, but I would imagine that it's not fun to feel like a father either to your partner. Constantly feeling like the bad guy. I always have to be the one that keeps things together and keeps the household running, and you just get to have all the fun, right? So there's that resentment. Ooh, lots of resentment in my experience when we have this dynamic. There really is no room for fun or lightness when we are in this role too, because being a parent to your partner is a 24/7 job. Anytime they are around or even not around, they could be at work and you still feel responsible for them and for yourself. Two people. You're taking the responsibility of two people. That's a serious job. There's no room for that playfulness. I assume a lot of us, the reason we enter into a relationship is because we can have fun with that person. We feel like we can have a good time. Where does that go? When we have this dynamic, fun goes out the door. There's not a whole lot of room for fun when we feel like we are this cold, critical, scrutinizing mother. When we look at the infantilized partner, that's what I'm going to refer to that person as, you might notice that they are turning to the parent partner for approval or disapproval. And so there's this weird fear or worry built in where that infantilized partner is wondering, is she going to be mad at me? Am I going to get in trouble? Look, she's mad at me. She's giving me that look. There might be a level of helplessness. No matter what I do, it's never good enough for my partner. They're always looking for me to make a mistake. There's that level of respect that I talked about earlier that kind of slips away when we're in this dynamic. I would imagine for a man who has a parent partner that it might feel disrespectful that you aren't trusted by your partner to take care of simple tasks, a lot of which you were probably already performing before you got into your relationship. So where is the trust for you to be able to take care of these things? Sometimes the infantilized partner will slip into the child role slowly as the other partner slips into the mother role. So we have maybe at the start of the relationship, there was very little of this dynamic. And then as time went on, it just got bigger and bigger, and both partners settled in. You can almost think that we're kind of enabling each other. Remember how I said it's a dynamic and two people are needed at least to form a dynamic. So we start to enable each other. How do we do that? If I'm the mother, then I am enabling you to be immature, to be childlike in ways that aren't fun, to be irresponsible and reckless, perhaps. I'm also enabling you to continue with any behavior that is not supportive to our relationship, especially to our sexual relationship, like I said earlier. If I am the child partner, I am enabling my mother or my parent partner to be controlling, to allow them to control me, allow them to hover over me and criticize and condemn and disapprove of my actions. That's not fun. I almost feel like, claustrophobic when I think about that. You're being watched like a hawk when you're in your own home, just trying to live. There's a volatility usually in the parent partner to be on the other end of that scrutinizing eye. It makes you potentially not trust your own decisions because you don't think your partner does. And now that's trickled into your own perception of your choices and your behavior, that you can't trust that anymore. You might even, as the child partner, start to willingly go to your parent partner and ask them for approval and potentially turn to them as your compass for what you should and shouldn't do. You lose that power that we all have within us to make choices based on how we feel and our intuition and our experience. We lose that when we're in this dynamic because a lot of the time as the child partner, we're giving up our power to the parent. And that makes for a really challenging relationship. If we want to feel like a power couple, that's a team, we can't do that in this dynamic. There is going to be someone who has the upper hand. I'll put that in quotes because it's not really the upper hand, but maybe it feels that way. And then you have the other partner who's powerless to the parent. Now, both really are powerless because both have accepted that this kind of a pattern is okay, and we have allowed it to go on, and the power really is stripped from both people, I would say. There's no partner that's got the better end of the deal. We're both suffering. I want to make this clear before we move on that this is a dynamic. I told you dynamics take two people, specifically the choices of two people. It can be really easy to slip into blaming and victimhood around this kind of a dynamic. Well, they make me feel like I have to be the mother or the father. Well, they're always watching me, waiting to criticize me. So it's very easy to not take responsibility for how we show up to the relationship. And the truth of that is that we make choices. Might not feel like we are actively, consciously making choices. I think sometimes this is happening at a subconscious level, but all of this is a choice. All of this is something that we have been willing to accept. The good news is you can absolutely make a change and you can choose to start to make change with this kind of a dynamic. That is something we have the freedom and the power to do. Isn't that amazing? You're not doomed to be in this kind of a dynamic for the rest of your life. But until we bring awareness to what's going on, it's going to keep happening and happening and happening. That's how beliefs and conditioning happens. It gets ingrained into the body at a very young age, into the mind, and then we perpetuate that by playing that belief over and over in our mind like a record. That's the belief that we believe until we make the choice to stop believing it. I can tell you, as a person who has felt like the mother in relationships, a lot of the time my partners didn't even know how I felt. They had no idea the resentment and the level of responsibility that I had taken on. I held on to it and I clenched my body and I pretended that everything was okay because that's what I've always done. My partners had no idea that I was suffering, and they could have been suffering too. I'm sure they were on some level. I just happened to be more aware of it, I suppose, or maybe more willing to share how I felt by the time I got to the point where I was sharing how I felt, which usually was by yelling and by complaining. That's the unfortunate thing here, is that sometimes we've been in the dynamic for so long that there is that resentment. And then if we get the chance to talk about it, it comes out as these explosions. You never do anything around the house, and you never take responsibility, and you don't pay the bills on time, and blah, 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 blah. Like, we just start losing our shit because we have gotten to this point of no return. And if we can learn to communicate these feelings in times where we are feeling calm and we're not triggered, that can be supportive. We essentially can send out little blips of information about how we're feeling rather than bottling it all up and then releasing it all at the same time. Now let's get into, how do we get here? How do we end up in a parent-child dynamic? Well, the answer, my friends, is conditioning. As usual, it's always conditioning. It really is. A lot about our challenges in life does go back to our childhood and our conditioning. As children, we learn the level of responsibility that we need to take for others. If you grew up perceiving that you had to take care of one of your parents, sibling, if you were a parentified sibling, as I've heard it called, you had to actually take care of your other siblings while you were a child. Did you feel like you had a lot of responsibility and there was a lot of weight on your shoulders and maybe not a lot of emotional support? Maybe nobody was asking you how you felt and if you were okay, checking in on you. I think of like a tiger mom with that, somebody who has really high expectations for their children, but doesn't really back it up with emotional support. Did you feel like everything was always blamed on you? You were always at the root of every problem. Maybe your beliefs now is, it's all my fault. I can't do anything right. Did you feel like there was no room for you? That everybody else got what they wanted, but not you. You specifically felt like there was something wrong with you, or that you weren't worthy or deserving of your needs being fulfilled. If you felt any of these ways, you may have taken your perceived level of responsibility for others and brought that into your adulthood. And now it's creating challenges in your relationship. We don't just turn 18 and bloop, they leave our mind. No, they're deeply ingrained into the very way that we perceive the world. Our beliefs shape reality. This is why it's really important to be aware of your beliefs and your conditioning and what you learned was true about love specifically. We get set in stone in these beliefs by observing our parents and other people. That's how we learn what love is. And then we bring that right into adulthood, where sometimes it creates disaster. As children, we don't take on responsibility for other people just willy-nilly because it's fun. We do it as a survival mechanism, like I mentioned earlier. It's literally life or death that I take this level of responsibility. I feel like if I can solve everyone's problems, then I will be lovable and I will be deserving. Being lovable and being deserving is survival for a child. Think about it. A very small child cannot live without the care of their parents. We look to our parents as gods, basically. We really see them as the ultimate symbol of what love is, for better or worse. We really don't believe they could do any wrong when we are very small. So what does that mean? That means we internalize the mistakes and we say, well, it must be something wrong with me. I must not be enough. I must not be trying enough. I must not be perfect enough. And so now I need to make sure that I am taking care of everything, in control all the time, making sure that all the boxes are checked and that everybody is happy. I literally have done that, gone to a party and looked around and made sure that everybody was happy, whatever the fuck that means. I have looked around and thought, well, that person looks unhappy. I think I need to do something about it. I need to save them. That's a part of this complex, of this dynamic, would be, I am the mother, so I must save all of my children. There is also a level of conditioning for women specifically. Yeah, as a woman, we are taught to nurture and to take care and to always be willing to put others before us. Those aren't bad qualities at all by any means. It's when it comes to us putting others' needs before ours are met. None of my needs have been met, and now I'm tending to yours. It's kind of like the situation with the oxygen masks on an airplane. You do have to put yours on first before you can help other people. So if we're constantly trying to take responsibility for and take care of other people, but we have none of our needs met, we haven't slept enough, we haven't had enough rest, we haven't had enough TLC, we haven't had any fun in months, and now I'm trying to take care of other people, but I barely even have it together myself. Exhausting. We may have watched our own mothers do this. And guys, if you're listening, you can relate. Maybe you saw your mother do this, put herself out there so much, taking care of other people, keeping track of what needs to happen. And maybe you saw your father become somewhat of a child in the relationship where he was taken care of. Every single one of his needs were taken care of. He didn't lift a finger. I think this is actually more common for generations before me too. We will watch what happens with our parents and believe that that's somewhat normal. And as women, we will recreate some of the behaviors that we watched our mother enact in the relationship with our fathers. We may have assumed that was the only way. That's where this stuff gets really messy, is when we look deep down and we see that we have beliefs about men or women, and those beliefs are not helping us in our relationship. Maybe deep down we think that all men are lazy. We think that all men are useless. That could be a factor in why we feel this way, that we feel like a mother, or vice versa. If you feel like a father, what are your deep-seated beliefs about women? Do you believe that women are damsels in distress? Do you believe that women are gold diggers, and you're constantly having to shell out cash for them? Your beliefs about men and your beliefs about women will certainly affect getting into this dynamic and feeling resentful and frustrated that you are there. I have a whole episode about how your beliefs about the opposite sex absolutely affect your relationship. So go ahead and check that one out if you want more information on that topic. Women are also taught that we can do it all, that we should be able to have a job and take care of our kids and then clean the house and then cook and maintain the bills and all of that all at once. And we could do it all. We're super women. Certainly women and men can live on their own and live single, and that's great. My belief is that if we're going to be in a relationship with another person, shouldn't our life be easier? That's two brains coming together. Shouldn't life get easier when we team up with our partner? Well, that's the problem right there. A lot of us are not on the same team as our partner. In fact, a lot of us are competing with our partner, and we see them as a rival. That would be another element of this dynamic. If I feel like I'm your mother, and not in a fun way, I am going to feel like you're my rival. Like I'm constantly having to do this for you, and I'm a victim to you. The sad part about this, and this is specifically for women, is that when we're told that men are useless, men are trash, was like a big thing to say, I don't know, a few years ago. And I don't need a man, I'm superwoman, I can do it all. It totally downplays what a man can do. A man can be a man. I read a book one time that said, it was The Queen's Code by Alison Armstrong, and she talks about how women want our male partners to be the perfect woman. That's the expectations that we have set for men in our lives, that we expect them to think, behave, and operate the exact same way that we do, and we expect that in a perfect way. Very unfortunate that we are susceptible to that, because men have a lot to offer. It's really cool when you have a man and a woman, what we can offer to each other when we allow the person to show up as they are, and we're not setting these huge expectations of perfection. How do we go about chipping away and undoing this frustrating dynamic? Before you get into any of the process of actually undoing and unwinding and and addressing and allowing things to unfold and change, can you first bring in this idea that it's going to take time, that there is a level of patience that is going to be required, and that things will happen naturally on their own once you get the ball rolling. There will be emotions that come in and ebb and flow, frustration and sadness and maybe grief about how long we have carried these beliefs for. I'm not saying that it's going to be this flood of emotion all the time and you're going to be miserable. I don't want to scare you out of doing this work. It's just to say that it would be normal for you to have this experience of a flow of emotions that might come in as you start to unfold and really approach and look at your beliefs. Speaking of beliefs, can you build in some belief for yourself, even if you have to kind of fake it at first? A voice in your head that you are dedicated to being the cheerleader as you go through this process. It's not easy. A lot of people don't even do it. And so can you become your own cheerleader, or at least a little voice in your head that maybe it's really quiet at first and it's like, yeah, keep going. You got this. Can you just make that little tiny voice at first and then slowly build up that part of you so that when things get a little tricky, you have that part of you that knows. I would even call that part of you potentially your higher self. Or if you believe in a higher power, let's incorporate that definitely. Something that can anchor us into belief and faith and knowing that things will get better as we go through this process. The next step in this process would be starting to build your awareness around what's going on. How do you feel in this role? Can you notice when you especially feel like you're in this role? I know I can catch myself if I'm ever, let's say, nagging. I can go in and be like, oh, it's happening right now. So noticing and awareness would be the first step. Don't try to change anything. I would ask yourself in this stage, how does being in this role affect how you show up in the relationship? Do you desire sex less? Do you feel undesirable? Do you feel cold? Do you feel like a bitch? That's one that I have felt. I'm just a bitch, I guess. How do you feel showing up to this relationship in this role? What does it look like? What does it feel like? I would even suggest having an image in your mind of who you become when you're in this role. Do you see yourself as, for me, it would be this kind of haggard, angry, tensed up, and very sassy woman. And by the way, beneath that, there is fear and there is sadness. So this isn't to say that we're trying to vilify this mother part of us. We created the mother because we needed to, out of a deep-seated fear as a child. So it's not about saying, well, we want to get rid of her. It would be more about asking her, how do you feel? What do you want me to know? What would be supportive to you in letting go a little bit? What can I do for you? What kind of boundaries would you like me to set? You could go in a meditation and feel what's underneath the mother role. Is there a scared little girl? Is there a layer of sadness? There's always going to be layers in my experience with emotions. Might show up as anger, and then beneath it, there's sadness. You've felt this before. If you have ever cried after getting angry, that's how I am. Try to get angry and just end up feeling sad. That's because emotions have layers and they can be complex sometimes. In the phase where we are building awareness, I wonder if this would be a good time to also bring in the idea that your partner is not to blame. And can we soften any kind of resentment that we have directly for our partner? It would be normal and understandable for there to be resentment, by the way. It's just that usually it doesn't really have to do with our partner if we're talking about a deep level. Remember how I said we form our beliefs in childhood. A lot of the pain that we experience around our beliefs and our current life would go back to childhood. So if I'm angry at my partner because he made me get into this dynamic, maybe I'm actually angry at somebody from my childhood. And maybe I'm even angry at myself. That's the case a lot of the time, that we're actually angry at ourselves, that we allowed ourselves to get here, that we allowed ourselves to feel this way, that we didn't get to speak our mind, how we feel, and get what we need. Once we know what we don't want, right? I don't want this belief anymore. I don't want this dynamic anymore. I just want it to go away. Then we can also start to think about, what do we want? How do I want to feel in this relationship? Do I want to feel free? Do I want to feel lighthearted? Do I want to feel sexy and desired and powerful and beautiful? If you're a man, do you want to feel respected? Do you want to feel admired, looked up to, trusted? When we do this, we kind of get our mind into this state of perpetuating change. So if we can just start to open up a little piece of the mind that can dream up this idea of what we want in our relationship, just opening up that little piece is a really big step, because it's us showing ourselves this is possible. I can do this. I can have this in my relationship. By the way, you can be happy in your relationship. A lot of people have done it. I'm not going to say you'll be happy every single day, every minute of your life, but you can have a general sense of happiness and fun and play in your relationship. That's not a crazy thing to want. So you get clear on exactly what you would like that to look like. I want to have fun. I want us to go out more. I want us to be more spontaneous and not always have to do our routine, and whatever that looks like to you. The next step here would be starting to establish boundaries. So you have noticed your own behavior. You've noticed when you slip into this role. Maybe you've noticed how you feel, how it affects how you're showing up. You know what you want now. So we've gotten to the point where we're going to start taking action. And I would say the beginning of taking action would be starting to slowly build boundaries. Boundaries, when I talk to my clients, I usually will say, boundaries are a practiced skill. We don't always set a boundary and then everything's perfect and it's never crossed and we never have to address it again in our life. I think a lot of the time we set a boundary and then it gets crossed, and then we set it again and then it gets crossed. It does rely on our ability to hold the boundary. By the way, this is a boundary not only with your partner, but with yourself. I'm not willing to say this anymore. I'm not willing to take responsibility for this anymore. This is a boundary with myself. And by the way, I probably will try to cross it. And maybe my partner will too, and other people as well, friends, family, maybe other people will try. And it's my job to hold the boundary about my feeling, about my life. That's my responsibility. So this is where we would start to slowly play with that idea of holding boundaries. If you've never done that before, then please, patience, like I said earlier. Like I said, it's a practiced skill too, so it would take time for us to become adept at setting and holding boundaries, and also knowing what the boundary needs to be. If you're setting boundaries, then there's probably going to have to be some conversation with your partner as well. Boundaries with other people, they work the best when we verbalize them, and that's a whole art in itself. With setting boundaries, I would always recommend the book Nonverbal Communication. He maps out an entire step-by-step process for explaining your feelings and then making a request based on your feelings. It's kind of hard to get fully into this. It's the art of the emotionally connected conversation. This takes time. That's another thing that would take time to develop with your partner, but you can absolutely start today. I would say there's an element of expressing through I statements. This is what I observe is happening, and this is how it makes me feel. Also being open to the fact that this is a conversation. So your partner will have input. Most likely, they will want to express how they feel too. And is that okay? Is that okay with you? Are you in a place where you can sit and listen and receive something that could be potentially uncomfortable or confrontational? We don't necessarily want this conversation to be a situation where people are losing their mind and yelling at each other. Definitely want this to be a little more calm. Maybe light a candle and dim the lights. Sit with each other on the couch and really put care and respect into this conversation that perhaps you guys have never had before. So it could get a little tricky. When in doubt, You can always bring in a coach like myself or a therapist to facilitate a conversation about boundaries. We're trained exactly in that. It would make sense to want a third party's opinion and a structure that a therapist or a coach can bring to the conversation. The last step in this process is to allow time and space for these things to unfold. I can tell you, as a person who has always felt very controlling and burdened by responsibility, that it's a long unwinding. It's like a big, long exhale. And sometimes we will go back into our old ways. Can you give yourself the grace and the space to be human? When we get a gaping wound, it doesn't heal overnight. It takes a long time. And sometimes we still feel pain from that wound for years after that. It gets harder sometimes, it's easier but each time you grow, you never go back to where you were before, ever. You could never learn and grow and expand and then contract back to where you were in the past. It's just not possible. So I hope that's a little piece of hope for you if you're working through this kind of a dynamic. Give yourself time and space and be compassionate with yourself, because when you can be truly compassionate with yourself, then you can do the same for your partner. And then you have something really good going on there. You have a really good foundation for a loving, connected, and trusting relationship. Thank you so much for joining me today in this conversation. I hope that there was some nugget of information in here that might support you if you are struggling with this kind of a dynamic. Of course, you can always reach out to me if you'd like to work together. You can find me on social media, on Instagram and TikTok. I'm coached by Kelby. And then if you want to find me on YouTube, I am Kelby Lauren. You can also reach me via email if you have any questions, if you want to have me answer them anonymously. And if you'd like to work together, you can reach me at coachedbykelby@gmail.com. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I always love to see new ratings and reviews. Give me any feedback that you feel like sharing. And then on YouTube, I would appreciate a like and subscribe. Thank you guys again for listening, and I'll see you next week.